Higher Education Minister Blade Nzimande says the National Student Financial Aid Scheme is not in crisis, despite payment problems which have seen vulnerable students go without their grants recently. Undeserving beneficiaries have also managed to defraud NSFAS of more than 5 billion rand in recent years. But Nzimande says that the scheme is unique and one of the best globally.
I must indicate that the resources that NSFAS so required is provided by this government. I must upfront indicate that NSFAS, insofar as it successfully services the needs to the vast majority of poor students, is not in a crisis, as many of our detractors would want the public to believe. We may be having glitches here and there, but the scheme is not in a crisis. Actually, we have turned the tide in student funding for the children of the poor and the working class, and NSFAS is the single biggest, largest student funding agency in Africa and a unique scheme in the world in that it completely funds students for their study, travel, accommodation, and personal care.
For more on that story, let's bring in the South African Union of Students spokesperson Asive Dlanjwa joining us from Bloemfontein tonight. Asive, very good evening to you. Welcome to the program. So the Higher Education Minister says when it comes to NSFAS crisis, what crisis? Do you agree?
Good evening, Butembegele, to you and your listeners and your viewers. There is a crisis at NSFAS. All evidence suggests that. Are the means that have been taken and measures that have been taken to try and deal with those things? Maybe yes. But to outright say there is no crisis at NSFAS, I think is disingenuous of the minister, and it is in fact does not speak to the realities of the thousands of students on the ground. So the measure of the crisis, or rather of the stability of NSFAS, must not be measured by press conferences and boardroom temperatures. It must be measured by the students on the ground. When you meet with them, they must be able to tell you that they have eaten. They must be able to tell you that they have a roof over their heads. If a single student has not eaten, they have no roof over their heads, they do not have sanitary products, they do not have all other toiletries, then obviously it means that the very thing that the scheme, or that the very mandate of the scheme has not been met. Hence, proving the fact that there is a crisis, and we have thousands of the students that fall to the description that I have just alluded to you.
You acknowledged quite early on that there are efforts underway to try and resolve some of the issues of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Is what is being done enough? Because by government's account, NSFAS has its fair share of problems which are being dealt with, but that's why they say it's not quite at crisis level yet. In fact, Minister Nzimande blames detractors for what's going on.
No, I think we welcome the interventions. There has been sufficient interventions at NSFAS. Are we altogether happy about them? No, we are not. But we think a lot of there has been some really decisive measures, even from those that the minister has given as a mandate to the board that they must do. So we welcome those. There are a few of them, obviously, which one we believe that the department must deal with this, and NSFAS. One of them, we still believe that some of the service providers that were hired are incompetent and they do not have the requisite capacity to service our students. And we are saying that those must be let go, they must be fired. Up until such a point is done, unfortunately, they will carry on to undermine efforts of government, efforts of NSFAS, and all our efforts to try and stabilize NSFAS, and it becomes the efficient tool that we want it to be for the interest of the poor and the working class.
Which service providers are you referring to? And second to that, can we really make them the problem when they didn't appoint themselves? Because one of the issues at NSFAS is that there's been the flouting of processes allegedly in making appointments, especially with the recent switchover in the payment system.
You see, on the issue of the processes, there is no quantitative or judicial or scientific process that is established that processes were flouted. It's pure hearsay from your outers, etc., which, by the way, are an enemy of everything we stand for as a country. Number two, the question of who we believe is incompetent. The likes of Izagas and your Inorokos. You see, Butembegile, when we judge the competency of someone. It must not be based on what we prescribe they should be doing. It must be based on the experiences of the people whom they are servicing. We have evidence. You can go yourself on social media. There is evidence to that effect that thousands of students are not receiving the necessary and the standard of service that we had agreed on NSFAS that they would be giving to the students. So those service providers, I'm giving an example of two, which I know for a fact have been an abs. In fact, there are even journalists, by the way, who think the whole direct payment system is called Izaga. Why? Because of the incompetence of Izaga. Izaga is but one service provider, but that is how incompetent and that is how painfully they have serviced our students. So that is as far as we are concerned. Some of them need to go unless and until they're able to get their act together.
Who are some of them? Are you referring to just the service providers, or do officials at NSFAS have to go? Because as relates to the CEO who's currently on special leave, there is an investigation there into the awarding of work, which goes back to his portfolio previously, and indeed questions about how some of the contracts at NSFAS themselves were awarded. We're hearing that some of those companies, in fact, were simply not fit for purpose.
I've mentioned two service providers which have proven to be incompetent, which should go.
What I'm asking is, beyond the service providers, are there people at NSFAS or even at higher education who should go for mismanaging this crisis, possibly?
Absolutely, absolutely. You are absolutely Butembegile. It would be wrong and disingenuous of us to put 100% blame on the service providers. They have been incompetent, but also at the level of NSFAS and at the level of the department, accountability, there must be a level of accountability. Beginning of this month, we would have seen, or rather last month, end of last month, the month ended 3-4 days and students had still not received their allowances. It means someone is not doing their work. One of the people whom we had identified as a union when we went to visit NSFAS several times was the CIO, because his systems were all in shambles and he proved to know nothing about what was happening there. We said that the CIO there, over and above everyone else whom must take the fault, but the CIO at NSFAS needs to be fired. He is one of the most incompetent men ever to exist.
Asive Dlanjwa, good to speak to you from the South African Union of Students. Thank you so much for your time tonight.